Playground!
Hooray!
This is the Deron Harris Podcast. Here's your host, Deron Harris.
Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Deron Harris. This is my podcast. Thank you for joining me this week. I do appreciate it. Check this out. The first private prison in the United States was opened in 1984. That's what I'm talking about today. The private prison plan that America has put in place and the effects that it has on our society. That's what I'm getting into today. But first, I want to check out and see. Quick, fast mental health check-in, man. How you doing this week? Hopefully everybody is doing well mentally. You know, I try as well as I can to cope weekly. It's getting perilous out here in the world, especially here in the United States. You know, I try not to watch a whole bunch of news to put myself in a depressive state, but at the same time, I do stay informed, and I try and stay informed so much that I try and bring it to everybody out here in the podcast world. So thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. So today, like I said, I'm talking about America's private prison plan. And like I said, the first private prison was opened in 1984. And the topic of private prisons is so controversial because it concerns, there's a lot of concerns about the motives and treatment of inmates. And that's really something to be concerned about, because while they may have committed crimes, they're still humans. They're still people, and to a degree, they should be, treated with I wouldn't say, maybe not respect, but they should be treated humanely, and it should be something based in the punishment for your crimes, but not something that is a vehicle for other people to make and to get wealthy off of. It shouldn't be that. In 2024, the United States prison system still had notable racial disparities, with black men like myself being heavily overrepresented, and we account for only 13% of the United States population. Black men constitute roughly 38% of incarcerated people in the United States. This is the result of their incarceration being 5.5 times higher than our white counterparts. So I'm 5.5 times more likely to go to jail. Now, since 2009, since its peak in 2009, that was in 2009. Let me put it like this. In 2009 is when, incarcerated black people was at its highest. Okay. Overall prison population since then, though, has dropped. And additionally, the imprisonment rate for black men has almost dropped half, 50% since 2000. But despite all of this, it doesn't really matter because we still face a much greater likelihood to be incarcerated, compared to white men or anybody else for that matter. Black men, they're out searching to incarcerate black men. That was a big plan. That was a huge plan. And now Hispanic men, I believe, are going to start joining those ranks, because the two most heavily discriminated races in the country right now, it seems to be blacks and Latins. So there's a lot of prisons being built across the country right now, and some of those places are going to be detention centers, and there are companies out there that have definitely jumped on the bandwagon of providing these facilities. More prisons are being constructed across the country. A lot of these prisons are privately owned, and that means if somebody owns that prison, that means that this prison is a business. That means that the owner is in the business of making sure that people are incarcerated. So me personally, I think that should be illegal. No state has a longer history or more proven, driven history of contracting out prisoners to private companies than Alabama. Alabama is like the Michael Jordan of the private prison system, and the United States is thinking of adopting some of their ideologies for their prison systems. You know, they have convict leasing. I mean, there's people that are, you know, hardened criminals working at McDonald's. You know, and they get to go. Some of them get to go home on the weekends, and some people are like, "Oh, well, that's kind of cool." But is it though? Is it though? Some of these people out here are violent offenders, you know, and they shouldn't. But these people use these companies use these prisons for their labor, so that they can keep their labor costs low, so that they can earn and extract a profit from their businesses. So, who are these companies that are providing these prisoners? Well, there's third-party companies owned and operated by private prisons, which are contracted by the government. And some of the largest private prison companies include CoreCivic. Okay, CoreCivic is there's a CoreCivic right down the street from my home, about 10, 12 miles down the road. There is a CoreCivic private prison. And that's one of the reasons I decided to do the podcast this week, because I drive by it pretty frequently. And on that road, and I know, you know, if you listen to my podcast, you know, some of you do and some of you don't, you know that I live down the street from about 3 or 4 prisons on this road. There's about 3 or 4 prisons on this highway here in Florida. Out in the National Forest here in North Florida. And a couple of them are like the county facilities. I think there's some other facility, some juvenile detention center or something like that. And then there's this CoreCivic place also. And it is, I mean, it's growing. They're building onto it. It's scary, man. CoreCivic. Okay, the CEO of CoreCivic is a dude named Damon T. Henninger. Formerly, he was the CEO of the same corporation, but it was known as the Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA. This company, it owns and leases and operates prisons, jails, and residential reentry centers. Now, in 2023, CoreCivic was the largest private owner of prisons and jails in the United States. The ownership structure of CoreCivic, and if you're into trading stocks, their stock call is CXW. The stock is a mix of, like, what does it say? It's institutional, retail, and individual investors. Approximately 74.18% of the company's stock is owned by institutional investors. 2.4% is owned by insiders, and 23.4% is owned by public companies and individual investors. Now, who are the investors to companies like this, to a company like CoreCivic? Who invests in CoreCivic? Well, Vanguard Group is one of CoreCivic's largest shareholders. BlackRock is another one of CoreCivic's large shareholders. State Street Global Advisors, Prudential's QMA unit. Fidelity is a significant contributor and holder of CoreCivic ideology. River Road Asset Management, Cooper Creek Partners Management, LLC, is an institutional holder of CoreCivic. FMR, LLC, also an institutional holder of CoreCivic. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Geode Capital Management, and Charles Schwab are all institutional investors in CoreCivic. So that means all of these companies are invested in people being incarcerated, the incarceration of citizens, in order to keep this industry flourishing, in order to keep this industry thriving. In order to keep it thriving, you have to have people, you have to have prisoners, right? There's other groups, though. CoreCivic isn't the only one. There's another one called the Geo Group. It's a private prison company that operates in 27 states and the federal government. And the same thing with LaSalle Corrections. They do the same thing. They operate in about 27 states, and they work with the federal government also. Now, my problem is this. No, I have a lot of problems with it, but this is another problem. The federal government works with this. But the federal government, at one point, they passed the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. And it abolished slavery except for if you commit a crime. And then that way you could be, and that was done deliberately. That was done deliberately because then after that, they began to make up bullshit law to incarcerate black men. And this was back when the 13th Amendment was passed. They would make up all kinds of vagrancy laws and just stupid laws to catch black men doing really literally nothing, minor stupid infractions. And they would incarcerate them, and which would put them back in the system to work for nothing. So the 13th Amendment, it did protect a lot of people. But at the same time, it also hurt a lot of people because it was a motive. It was a tactic that they used because, yeah, we're going to end this, but we're going to make it so that we can still gain the revenue from this free labor. And the way we do it is through through creating a need for prisons by creating drawing up plans or bills to make simple things illegal in order to snag, and that's one of the reasons weed is illegal. One of the reasons weed was illegal to begin with is because black people smoked a bunch of it. We smoke weed, and that's one of the ways to get us. And look at it throughout history, weed has been used to stop us in cars and frisk us down and all kinds of shit. Just a little bit of weed. I smell weed on you. You know what I mean? I smell weed. It's suspicious. That gives us probable cause for some fucking weed. Come on, man. Really? And that's how it's always worked. So, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolished slavery and involuntary servitude also, by the way, with a few exceptions, like I said. And there was a quote: "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or place subject to their jurisdiction." The ratification was passed by Congress January 31st, 1865. It was passed by Congress in January 31st, 1865, and then ratified on December 6th, 1865. The impact of that thing was it freed millions of slaves. It freed my people. It gave us freedom in a country that never had any love for us, where there were no laws created to help us or protect us. There was no assistance. There was nothing. We were basically turned out into society and basically left to fend for ourselves, which we did. But in order for them to maintain the things that they wanted to maintain, the status quo down here, the society, that was in place at the time, they began to make all these laws in order to incarcerate black people, and thus you have the birth of. So I guess the I don't want to say private prisons because it wasn't until 1985, but this was the start of something that would become the private prison, the convict leasing, and the blatant incarceration, wrongful incarceration of a lot of black people, especially black men. Now, the 13th Amendment was a response to a number of factors, including the struggles of enslaved Africans. Plantation owners feared uprising because it was starting to get to the point where motherfuckers was like, look, we about done with this shit anyway, and something got to happen. So either something going to happen or we going to get it popping here. And at the same time, that was happening. Britain, their Caribbean colonies, it started to decline. Their trade from there started to decline, and the spread of slavery and the opposing anti-slavery and abolitionist movements were on the rise as well, and that's a lot of the reasons that the 13th Amendment kind of, was kind of right on time at the same time. But the southern states definitely opposed it. But only 4 states actually rejected it, which were Mississippi, Delaware, New Jersey, and Kentucky. So 4 states actually rejected the 13th Amendment. They didn't give a fuck about it. Mississippi definitely rejected it because they needed to keep their revenue. Because if you go down and look throughout the South, if you've been through the North and you've been through the South, let me put it like this. If you've been through the North and you've been through the South, you see some things. One of the things you see is a lot of grandeur. There was a lot of grandeur, especially in the South. In the South, there was some, in Atlanta, there was some great architecture and grandeur. There was a lot of, but then it fell off and it fell into decline, and it fell really far into decline. And that's why in the South, you have a lot of towns that aren't necessarily finished. And they don't have good economies in these towns. And the reason why is because the slave trade collapsed. So they had no way of making this revenue, and they had no way of making this push to continue. But even though the 13th Amendment was passed, they had to figure out a way to make this happen. So despite the 13th Amendment, a new form of slavery developed in the 20th century through convict leasing. And this practice allowed private individuals to lease out prisoners for forced labor. And that's where it started. So I'm going to take a quick, fast break, but when I come back, we're going to talk about rehabilitation, recovery, and reform. I'm Deron Harris. This is my podcast. I'll be right back. Hey, everybody. What's happening? Welcome back to the show. Before I went to break, I was talking about the 13th Amendment, but now, and just before, I was going to get into rehabilitation, recovery, and reform. Now, this is what needs to happen. Now, our prison system is not in the business of rehabilitation. That is obvious. It is in the business of incarceration. Okay? That is also obvious. Our prison system desperately and definitely needs to be overhauled, but they don't care. And the reason why is because the revenue stream is very good. But the problem with that revenue stream, they call it convict leasing. But at the very essence of it, it's slavery. It's legal slavery. And these things have got to stop. But they make it seem like these prisons have to be here and we need these things in order to protect our society. But do we? Do we need these things, these prisons and all this over-policing and this added layer of law? Do we need these things? Because I'll tell you why I don't think we do. In Norway, their prison system is known for its rehabilitation and its reintegration efforts with their inmates, which include restorative justice. Now, the Norwegian model aims to heal harm caused by crime and reintegrate offenders into society, and they do this by essentially nurturing this person back to a healthy mind state. There are small community-based facilities instead of these giant conglomerates of prisons, and with that, it's almost like having smaller class sizes. When you have smaller class sizes, the students learn better, and it's just a fact. It's the same principles. If you have smaller community-based facilities, the inmates they're placed near friends and family, and they maintain social and emotional well-being, and that also helps them to have those support systems of people saying that you can rehabilitate yourself. You can get from underneath you. Yes, you've been set back, but this does not have to be the end for you. Another high point is individualization. I'm sorry. Inmates they're given opportunities for personal growth. They're given more responsibilities, and they're given opportunities to actually earn trust. And that's what people need. People need, because what our prison system does is once you've become an offender, you're scarred for life here. You can never come up from underneath the things that you've done. Unless, of course, you're Donald Trump, then you get away with pretty much whatever you do. But for the most of us, if we get in trouble for something, most of us, we're going to get punished for it. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to get punished to the degree that even when we get out, we are looked down at in society. This here, the way they do things in Norway, it gives people an opportunity to redeem themselves, to atone for some of the wrongs that they may have done. Another thing that they do over there is they are big on education. So formal education is a long-term priority. And inmates are also given opportunities to pursue their education and other vocational programs. They are given a leg up. They're given an opportunity to try to come back to society. Now, we say we do that here, but we really put more focus and emphasis on keeping people in the system. That's because there's no money in rehabilitation. There's no money in rehab because once people are better, they don't have to come back here. But if you don't rehab these people and also you set them up, for failure in their communities, eventually they're going to come back here. And 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're in here forever. And then we have your servitude for the rest of your life. You are forever a slave to these people. Okay? Normalization. Inmates are given normality through daily training and educational programs, like I just said. They are able to earn freedoms in Norway. Inmates gradually earn more freedoms by taking on responsibilities or accomplishing different goals. They don't do that here. You go out and fucking work. You get your ass out there in this fucking field and you work from sun up to sundown. You come in here, you shit, shower, and shave. You eat a little chow, and then you get your ass back in your cell. There's no opportunity to earn any kind of, because your purpose here is to work. That's it. You get 3 hots in a cot, and then you go fucking work. In Norway, they have what's called post-release support. Post-release support. Inmates have access to active labor markets, programs, housing, social assistance, and disability insurance. We don't do that here because we throw our incarcerated citizens in the garbage. We throw them in the trash. Once you're scarred for life. There's no way you can possibly come back for many of the things that you've done. Unless, of course, you're Donald Trump, then you can come back from fucking anything. But most of us here are when we're released from prison, there are really very few programs that we can get involved in. There are some, but very few. And there's definitely no one rooting for us. There's not, no one rooting for convicts. And there's definitely not anybody rooting for black convicts. So the majority of these people, once they leave the system, within a few months, they're right back in the system. Which that's what they want. And they call that law enforcement. No, you're cutting off legs in order to get them to come back to this well that you have. You're cutting people off. Another thing they have that we struggle with here that they have in Norway is a humane environment. Inmates have their own spaces there. And like in some cases, a lot of the inmates wear their own clothes and prepare their own meals. Now, we got some inmates here that do have some creature comforts from home, but over there it seems like it's the norm. Here it just seems like county blues, and that's what you get. You know what I'm saying? And as a direct result of Norway having all these systems in place, Norway's prison system has one of the lowest recidivism rates in the world. In 2018, the reconviction rate was 18% within 2 years of release and 25% after 5 years of release. It's much, much higher here. Much higher here. So there definitely needs to be some changes. Definitely needs to be some changes. There needs to be some reform. Criminal justice reform needs to happen. People fight against criminal justice. They're fighting against criminal justice reform. And they fight against it for a variety of reasons, ranging from ideological beliefs to economic interests. There are some reasons, and here are some of the primary reasons that people do this. They number one is economic interest. Private prison industries. Companies that operate private prisons profit from high incarceration rates, and they have a financial interest in maintaining this status quo. A lot of these people, they lobby against reforms that could actually reduce the prison population, but they don't want to do that because that cuts their revenue. Other interests are law enforcement funding. Police departments and other law enforcement agencies receive significant funding based on crime rates and the perceived need for law enforcement. Reforms that reduce incarceration and decriminalize certain behaviors can be seen as threats to this funding. You see what do you follow me? It's about money. It's not about whether or not we're protecting our society. You know what I'm saying? They don't care about protecting the society. It comes down to money, political influence, and power. Well, again, political reasons. Tough on crime policies. Politicians often gain support by advocating for tough on crime policies, which are popular with certain voter base. Guess who that is? These policies are seen as being tough on crime and supportive of victims, making it politically risky to advocate for reforms perceived as lenient. So, because they just don't want to, they make it seem like they can't do it. They cannot reform this, because if we reform this, then there are some people that we're gonna definitely let slip between the cracks, and those people could be potentially the bad parts of society, and that's bullshit. You know what I'm saying? And they have the fear of appearing soft on crime. Politicians fear that supporting criminal justice reform might make them appear soft on crime, which can be politically damaging, especially in high-profile crime. If a high-profile crime occurs and it is linked to the reforms. You know what I'm saying? So that's what they look for, and I wouldn't put it past certain political parties to doctor or what's the word I'm looking for? Fabricate, or dramatize some sort of high profile crime. Because they use that to fearmonger people into voting for, voting against prison reform. They don't want to. Also, ideological beliefs, punitive beliefs. Some people believe that punitive approach to justice, where punishment is seen as a necessary response to crime. They may view reforms focused on rehabilitation and reducing sentences as undermining justice, which they want justice at the expense of a person's life. Someone made a mistake. Like, people don't make mistakes. People make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has made a mistake. There is no person on the face of this earth that has never made a mistake. I've made mistakes. I've been to jail 3 times. I've never been to prison, but I got locked up for like 24 hours over some weed or some dumb shit, but just to get me in the system. They could have let me go, but instead They took me, which is fine. They doing their job. But when I got there, when I got to the Tombs, I was in Brooklyn. When I got to the Tombs and realized how many people were in there, how many, what'd they get you for, man? I was smoking a blunt in the park. What they got you out of dub? You know what I'm saying? What'd they get you for, man? I had 2 roaches, in a wallet that I didn't carry for a word. And they took it, and it's just little shit like that. But then I started noticing that it was overwhelmingly Black and Latin. You know what I'm saying? And that's crazy, man. There's this belief that the black race is inherently evil and needs to be punished. There's a racial bias and prejudice out there. Some of these people oppose reform because it is rooted in racial bias. The criminal justice system is disproportionately black. Black and people of color, Latin. And there are those who resist this change because it would alter this dynamic, because it would actually make it so that we're not those people. We're not those people. You know what I'm saying? We're not those people. They say that we're unsafe. There's a belief that the harsher the penalty, the higher that the incarcerations, the rates are, and necessity for maintaining public safety and all this garbage, man. And this is the reason that they don't want. But historically, white people have created and done some of the most heinous things to not just one certain person, but entire civilizations of people. But they do it on the basis of justice. We need justice. But really, it's on the basis of class and control. Racism, class, and control. You see, the criminal justice system can be used to control marginalized populations, right? It can be used to, like, reforms that reduce incarceration or emphasis on rehabilitation over punishment can be seen as undermining to this control. And they want to maintain this control. So they have to make it seem like the rest of these things are so dire that these systems need to be here. This place needs to be here. We cannot spend the money on rehabilitation because we need to have a strong criminal justice system to fight against these savages that commit these crimes. You see what I mean? There's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of misconception. There's a lack of awareness. Many people are just unaware of the systemic issues within the criminal justice system, such as racial disparities, wrongful convictions, and ineffectiveness of punitive measures in reducing crime. People, of course, this is one of the main ways, is fear-mongering media and political rhetoric often emphasize extreme cases and create fear based on narratives that suggest any reduction in punitive measures will lead to chaos and increased crime. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. You get it? You follow me? You starting to feel me? They do this on purpose in order to maintain this status quo. Institutional inertia, resistance to change. Large institutions, including the criminal justice system, often resist change due to bureaucratic inertia. Individuals within these systems may resist reform out of desire to maintain the status quo or due to skepticism about new approaches, training, and culture. Law enforcement and judicial systems have long-standing cultures and training programs that emphasize traditional methods. Reform efforts can be seen as threats to these established practices. So all of these things are threats. 7, victim advocacy concerns. Perceptions of justice for victims. Some victims with advocacy groups argue that certain reforms may undermine justice for victims by reducing penalties for offenders. They may believe that severe punishment are necessary for justice and deterrence. In summary, a lot of these things are driven by, the opposition I'm speaking on, are driven by like a lot of economic interest, political calculations, ideological beliefs, racial and social bias, misinformation, institutional resistance, and a lot of concerns about victims' rights. You know what I'm saying? And that's what they stand up on. But what about the rights of the incarcerated person? But that's just it. You're done. You're done. If you're incarcerated, you're thrown to the wolves. You're thrown to the wolves. You are thrown into this system where that you can be leased out. You can be leased out against your will and forced to work for free. It's a sad state of affairs here, and it's allowed to persist. And there's got to be something that people can do, because I wholeheartedly believe that the private prison system and the whole industry should be illegal. It should be illegal. So what if we got rid of it? What if we got rid of the private prison system and made it illegal? What if we did that? Hey, y'all, what's up? Welcome back to the show. I got some grammatical issues happening. Actually, what it is, I think I need some new glasses. I'm trying to read through my material here. And it's looking like my prescription is giving out on me. But I'm going to try and get through it. And who knows, in the new year, I might come back with some glasses or something. So before I went to break, I asked a question. And the question was, what if we got rid of the private prison system or the whole industry and made it illegal? If the private prison system crumbled and failed, the impact on society would be multifaceted and super significant. But here are some of the things that could pop off, though. Like, the first thing is the reduction in incarceration rates, and the less incentive for higher incarceration. Private prisons profit from higher incarceration rates. Without them, there may be less lobbying for tough on crime laws and mandatory minimum sentencing, leading to a potential decrease in incarceration rates. Shifts to alternatives. If the failure of the private prison industry might prompt a shift towards alternative sentencing, such as probation, community service, and rehabilitation programs, which is, for a lot of crime, man, I think a lot of the things out here, I mean, you don't need to send somebody to jail for some weed, man. I'm sorry. It just don't need to happen. But they're continuously using it. You know, down here in the state of Florida, over the election, they had the opportunity to make marijuana legal here in the state of Florida, and for some reason it didn't fucking pass. And you know it's bullshit, because everybody I fucking know, and over 50% of the state of Florida, people smoke weed. People smoke weed here. That's what we've been doing here. You know what I'm saying? People have been smoking weed. But they can't make it legal. They can make it medicinal, but they can't make it legal. And the reason they can't make it legal is because that's one less thing that they have that they can use to get you. That's one less thing. One less thing that they can use to get you. Because if it's still illegal and you're still consuming it and buying it illegally, that means you're a prime candidate for the system. And they're looking for you because of the economic impacts. Number 2, economic impacts. Job losses. Employees of private prisons would lose their jobs. You know, but I think they shouldn't be open. But that would impact local economies. It really would, because some people out here, you know, there are people out here that work at this prison out here. You know, and they're a pretty prominent employer out here where I live at. Core Civic is one of these places. You can drive by their sign, and they got a sign out in front of their facility, hiring at X amount of dollars per hour. I think it's like $22 or something like that, $22 or $20-something an hour. So they do employ people. They employ some people. But there are other things that could employ people as well. And there are things that actually could employ people that would contribute to the economy, that would benefit everybody, including the incarcerated people. That's if these people were somehow able to go to work and get a job in the industries, if they were not turned away on purpose so they could not find work, then these people could too potentially contribute to the economy as well. Get what I'm saying? But they don't want them to contribute to the economy because that would mean that they would have equal footing. And that's the one thing that they do not want in this country, which is for black people to have equal footing or minorities to have equal footing. They don't want that. And this is one of the ways to keep that. This is one of the ways to keep that status quo. Reallocation of funds. The money previously allocated to private prisons could be reallocated towards the public prison system, rehabilitation programs, and other social services, which I think that's what it should be anyway. It should have been that to begin with. It should be that. You know what I mean? And I just think that. I just think that's what it should be. You give that money that the private to the public prison system. You know what I'm saying? The state prison system. You know what I'm saying? Give those funds so that the inmates can have, books or, rehabilitative services and things of that nature. Insurance, when they get out. School. Things of that nature. But they don't want that. Number 3, changes in prison condition. Potential for improved condition. Public prisons are generally subject to more oversight and regulations than private prisons, which could lead to better living conditions for inmates, which I think, just because you committed a crime doesn't mean that you need to be down here in the dregs of society fucking, having your life threatened and your asshole and your booty fucked and all kind of shit like that. You shouldn't be subjected to that because you smoked a joint in the wrong place. You know what I'm saying? But one thing they like to do is they like to group us all together. It doesn't matter. These people are in what did you do? I raped a bitch. Well, what did you do? I smoked a joint. Well, why are you motherfuckers in the same room together? You know what I'm saying? But they don't care. They just throw you all in there. And, the conditions that a lot of these inmates, live through is deplorable. And another thing that would happen is, it would that is not necessarily positive. It would put a strain on some of the public prison systems if an influx of the inmates were to come from these private facilities, but the funds could be used to make these public facilities better. These public prisons could be better. Number 4, policy and legal reforms. Criminal justice reform. The collapse of the private prison industry could accelerate broader criminal justice reforms aimed at reducing mass incarceration and addressing systemic issues. That's the first thing that that's what I would love for it to happen. Just speed it up. Reduce mass incarceration. Mass incarceration sounds like it should be illegal anyway. Because it just seems like motherfuckers are making up shit just to incorporate large swaths of people to fill these prisons so that they can have this work done and basically appease their shareholders. Simple as that. Legal challenges is another one. There could be a lot of legal battles over the transfer and treatment of inmates from private to public facilities, as well as lawsuits from private prison companies. But I don't give a fuck about them suing people. People should sue you. I just think it's deplorable. I think the private prison system is it's based in racism. It's based in fucking classism. It just really is. It just reeks. It reeks of fucking of racism and classism. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to hide it. I'm just going to call it out how I see it. It'd be one thing. It would be one thing if it was evenly mixed, but it really isn't, because we are the most heavily incarcerated, the most heavily policed community in this country, if not the world. Social and community impact, number 5. The community reinvestment. Funds saved from the dissolution of private prisons could be invested in community programs, education, mental health services, and drug rehabilitation, potentially reducing crime rates in the long term. But they don't want that. And that's what, to me, that's what a good society looks like. Investing in community programs, education, mental health services. That's what a healthy community looks like. Drug rehabilitation, potential to reduce crime rates in the long term. That is what a healthy community looks like. But that's not what we have. And the reason we have what we have is because of the legislation that is continuously passed. They do it on purpose. It's a plan. Because this right here could 100% happen. We could completely do this, but we choose not to. We choose not to. We choose to fearmonger. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. We continue to do that. And this is why we need to have these things. We could have reduced recidivism. Emphasis on rehabilitation over punishment could lower people coming back to fucking jail. Benefiting, and this would benefit our society, man. It could benefit our society if we had the people reintroduced back into our society to become contributing, functioning, normally functioning members of society. People make mistakes. They should have an opportunity to come back to society. They should have an opportunity to come back to society and make a difference. They should be given the tools while they're in jail, but they aren't given any tools. Instead, they're given fucking shanks and shivs and, stay with your kind and no rehabilitation services whatsoever. I mean, they try. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it doesn't really seem like it. And if they do, it really doesn't seem like they're trying too hard. There's a lot, man. There's a lot. Political and public sentiment. Public opinion. There could be a shift in public opinion against profit-driven incarcerations, increasing support for reforms and humane treatment of inmates. Political pressure. Politicians may face pressure to ensure the transition is handled smoothly and to implement long-term changes to prevent future reliance on private incarceration. Yeah. The collapse of the private prison industry could serve as a catalyst for significant reform in the criminal justice system, and really kind of lead to a more rehabilitative and less punitive approach to crime and punishment. However, it would require a lot of careful management and negotiations through this process. I mean, because you are in fact dealing with a prison population, inmates, and I can definitely admit that can be, perilous. So how do we beat this? How do we beat the private prison system? And it's not going to be easy. So defeating the private prison system involves a broad approach, multifaceted approach that includes legislative actions, a lot of public awareness, economic strategies, advocacy. But there are several things that can be done. There are several things that we can actually do to try and start the decline or the destruction of the private prison. We could start by banning private prisons. But right now, that's not happening because how much you want to bet that a lot of the wealthy people in the country invest in the private prison system? I think that some of these people that invest in these things, if we got together and boycotted these things and gave them the reason as to why, I think some of this stuff could change, because it definitely would affect their bottom line, but we'd have to have a lot of willing participants. So we could ban private prisons, advocate for federal, state, and local laws that prohibit the operation of private prisons. Some states like California have already taken steps to phase out private prisons. Go ahead on, California. People talk a lot of shit about California, and there's a lot of shit going on in California, and a lot of California shit is bullshit. But I'm down with that. People who taking steps to try and get rid of some of this shit, man, because they realize and recognize that the shit is wrong to do to people. Another thing that we could do is eliminate the incentives. Pass legislation that removes financial incentives for incarceration. That's bullshit. Financial incentive for incarceration? That just sounds fucking shady as shit. You know what I'm saying? These people out here incarcerating people on purpose to meet a status quo. You know what I'm saying? A lot of these contracts, they guarantee a certain amount of inmates or regular occupancy rates, to their shareholders. And that these people go out and do you know how many wrongly convicted people or innocent people are in jail right now because of serving private prisons? Because of the way that this has to take. These people are out in our communities, over-policing our communities to meet a status quo for shareholders. Are you understanding me now? You starting to get it? They're not saving society. They're not saving society. They are deliberately hurting our society in order to make money off of your back, black people. Black men, I'm talking to you. And now Latin men, because you guys is going to start going to jail now too, a lot. Because they need this. They need this. Regulation and oversight is another. Implement stricter regulations and oversight for private prisons, making it more difficult and costly for them to operate, like they do so many businesses anyway. But they won't, because so many wealthy people, so many people that we know of, so many people that we know invest in the private prison system. They need to include requirements for transparency, adherence to public prison standards, and regulation and regular inspections, which they don't. That's not what they do now because it's private. But if you started, running their ass through the motherfucking ringer and calling them out on the bullshit that they're on, as opposed to just letting it slide, going, well, that's just what their business model is. If you start calling them out on it, probably squeeze them out. Economic strategies could work. Divestment in campaigns. Encourage public and private entities to divest from companies involved in private prison from the private prison industry. This includes pension funds, universities, and financial institutions. But as I said in the beginning, there are actual financial institutions that actively invest in this. Another thing you could do is also you could cut off funding. Push for the reallocation of government funds from private prisons to public prisons. You know what I mean? But now I feel like it's actually going to be the opposite. Rehabilitation programs and community-based alternatives to our incarceration could very well work as well. Community-based. Okay? Needs to be right here. Our communities need to handle it right here. And that's going to come through number 3, which is public awareness and advocacy. Raise awareness. Launch public awareness campaigns to educate people about the negative impacts of private prisons, including their profit motives, poor conditions, and the contribution to mass incarceration. It needs to be said more prominently. They are great at coming up with language, okay? Campaigns, public relations, to make this stuff sound necessary, to make it sound noble, to make it sound like it is an absolute necessity, but it is rooted in the deepest of evil. It's evil. This shit is bullshit, and they know it is because it involves slavery. They don't want to call it that. They call it convict leasing, but it is slavery. There needs to be advocacy groups. This could also support and collaborate with other advocacy groups, working with working with the private industries, working to end private prison in the private prison industry. Shout out shit they're doing. Profit motives. The poor conditions that these people have to live in. Shout it out. Get down with the fucking ACLU or something, man. Something. You can use media and storytelling, social media, everything. Use media, social media, and all the rest of everything to get this stuff out. Tell stories of people who have been affected by the private prison system. The ones that have made it through it. Now, this is not going to come, easy. But we can, it can actually absolutely do it. We can make it just as hard for them as they make it for us. We can give them legal challenges, and this is exactly what should happen in the first place. This should be happening. Support legal challenges against private prisons for human rights violations, inadequate conditions, and other abuses. Successful lawsuits like this can lead to increased scrutiny and financial penalties against these companies. Somebody needs to stop being afraid. Many people need to stop being afraid and sue them. Start filing suit against them for these things. Investigative reporting. That's one thing I'm big on. Encourage people to investigate some journalism, to pull out this. This is kind of what I'm doing now. This is, I did all this research to give you this podcast today. More of us need to do this and get it out. Some of these things I'm going to put up on my social media. Now, some of this stuff I get shot down a lot. I get shadow banned and all kind of shit, but that's part of being a social justice warrior. You know what I'm saying? And the other day I was thinking I was getting tired of being a social justice warrior, but you know what though? The more I look at it shit like this, come on, man. We all got to stand up. We all need to stand the fuck up, and we all need to tell these motherfuckers how we feel about this, and that there's no place in our society for it. We need to promote alternatives to incarceration. We need to have better rehabilitation programs. We need to advocate and invest in these programs and better reentry programs that reduce the recidivism and provide for individual transitioning out of the criminal justice system. Because there's going to be this. We're going to need this. We're going to need better systems to do this. And even the halfway houses treat people like shit. You know what I'm saying? It's wild business, man. We got to do something. This is a scourge of our people. The private prison system is deliberately taking advantage of our people, and we have to stop it. There are community-based solutions. You know what I'm saying? There's alternatives to incarceration. Restorative justice programs, like I mentioned earlier. Like mental health treatment, like they do in Norway. Better substance abuse programs. We got to actually start caring about fucking people. But there also need to be sentencing reform. And with that, because we have a lot of judges out here that don't like black people either, that's on the take as well. That they also are contributing to this mass incarceration. You know what I'm saying? We can decriminalize a lot of offenses, but they won't. Like marijuana, we could have decriminalized marijuana and had it for recreational use here in the state of Florida, but they don't want to do it. They want to keep the criminalization of marijuana so that they can use this to incarcerate people. We can also eliminate mandatory minimum sentence. We can expand parole and probation. We could do a whole bunch of other things other than incarcerate people and fill the prisons with other systems. But you know what? They know this already. They just want to do this. They just want this to be done because this is how it's done. I'm going to take another break. When I come back, we're going to continue down the rabbit hole, y'all. I'm Deron Harris. This is my podcast. I'll be right back. Hey, folks, what's up? Welcome back to the program. Before I went to break, I was telling everybody about, or I was asking what could we do to try and end this practice of the private prison system. How can we fight this system? And I came up with some pretty good things, and I was just going down a list, and I'm going to continue. This is number 6, political engagement. What we need to do is we need to elect reform-minded officials and support and vote for candidates in all levels of government that are committed to, reforming the criminal justice system. And that right there would definitely aid a lot, but we have to find something that is almost impossible to find, which is honest politicians. Lobbying and advocacy could also work. We need to engage in lobbying efforts to influence policymakers and advocate for legislative change that reduce the roles of private prisons. Number 7, corporate responsibility. Corporate pressure. That's all. We need to pressure a lot of these corporations to end their contracts with these people, man. We're not going to do business with you if you're still doing business with them. You feel me? And that works, but we don't seem to think it does, because it's like we don't want to go without stuff, so we won't stand together up against things that hurt us. We'd rather just let it hurt us and not really think too much about it. It's like having a splinter that you can't really get out. It doesn't really bother you, but it's just annoying enough for you to know it's there. So Another thing is consumer activism, engaging consumers to boycott companies that profit or invest in private prisons. Like I was just saying, cut the funding off from these folks. Cut their ass off at the legs. They automatically assume that we're going to give them business, but we shouldn't let them get that comfortable. They shouldn't be comfortable. We should make them earn our business. And one of the ways they can earn our business is by having morally just practices. And I'm sorry, I don't care how you look at it. The private prison system is not moral or just. Number 8, research and data. Data collection. Support research on the impacts of private prisons and alternatives to incarceration, providing evidence to policymakers and public benefits on reform. That's if you're making policy and we can provide you with this information to say that this shit works better, then you should do this shit. If you don't do this shit, even though it works better, that means you down with it. And that means your ass needs to be voted out. Simple as that. And there needs to be transparency. We need to advocate for transparency and public access to data on the conditions of the prisons, the treatment of the inmates, the outcome of their time served, the financial aspects of the private prison industry. All this stuff needs to be on the record for people to see, because I think if people saw how much people were making on the backs of other people, then they might be a little upset about it. They might be a little more upset about it than they are today. And I'm deadly serious about that. So the last thing I want to talk about about this subject is the private prison system and Project 2025 and how they match up together. Now, I kind of wrote this down, but I wanted to kind of read it, and I didn't want to forget it, so I wrote it down. It's better for their pockets, but not our society. We take people who have made simple mistakes and demonize them and turn them into monsters, while the real monsters are the ones who own and control the industry, the ones who write the plans and develop the ideas and then go out and sell the idea, and the ones who invest in the idea. They claim that they want a safe and just society for all its citizens, but they continue to contribute or fund programs that help underprivileged people. They also vote and support laws and projects they know will deliberately harm and also disparage people of a particular community. They willingly and directly contribute to the crime rate in this nation because they know it will provide a need for their industry so that they can make a profit for their shareholders. It is a well-organized and well-oiled machine, and in order to run a machine, you need oil. We are the oil. They are purposefully crippling our communities to fuel this industry. We have to stop this. Now, Project 2025 is going to fuel this industry. And the way it's going to do that is by all of the things combined, the impact of all of the policies combined that affect that neighborhood, the cutting of the Department of Education, Medicaid, the rolling back of DEI protections, et cetera, et cetera. All these things are meant to disparage our community, to force us into a place of desperation where we have to do things, sometimes things that are illegal, to feed our families. And they are doing this deliberately and on purpose. And they are calling it patriotism. We have to stop this, folks. And it's going to take all of us to do it. But it can be done if we decide that's what we want to do. All right? So that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Deron Harris Podcast. I want to thank everybody for joining me this week. I want to thank my parents for giving me the mindset, but I really want to thank my dad today for giving me an analytical mindset to be able to sit down and analyze things like that. You know, things like this. My dad and I, we sit down, we talk about things like this a lot. So, you know, I really want to thank my dad for giving me this analytical mindset. I want to thank my wife for being the best supporter that I've ever had. One day I'll have her on the podcast. Again, who knows, whenever she'll decide she wants to talk again. But I want to thank her for being my biggest fan and my biggest advocate at the same time. I want to thank my producer and best friend, Jesse Yandel, for delivering a lights out show week after week. I do appreciate you, man. And also I want to thank you for the inflammatory content, as I do every week. I want to thank Gentry Thomas for the platform, the podcast playground, and all the other wonderful podcasts that are on the platform as well. And last but not least, and once again, I want to thank all of you for joining me this week and joining me last week and the weeks before and the weeks in the future. And I do appreciate you. I really do, from the bottom of my heart. And I really hope that I'm giving you good content that you can use, that will empower you, that will make you think, that will cause you to have conversations and how to navigate through this society that we have going on here today. So I think, again, that's going to do it for me for this week's episode of the Deron Harris Podcast. And think about what I said, folks. Private prisons are not good, man. They're not good. And we can beat them. But we have to want to beat them. All right? So let's get out there and whoop their ass. Peace.
You've been listening to the Deron Harris Podcast. Subscribe to the show, give a good rating, and everything you need to know is at DeronHarris.com.